Hello, I am Allison of the Cottage Tea House. Welcome to my course, Foundations to Herbal Wisdom. This is a 6-month deep dive course that will give you all of the needed tools and experiences to confidently step into the world as an entry-level herbalist. So let's begin, shall we? When someone asks me, is an herb safe? My first question is always, in what dose and for whom? This week, we are going to learn how safety, potency, and dosage form a continuum, not 3 separate boxes. There's a quote by a physician who was pretty prominent in the 1800s. He was very ahead of his time, and he's someone who I would consider the main forefather of modern herbalism. This quote is by none other than Paracelsus, who absolutely fascinates me. His quote is, "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. Only the dose makes a poison. And we're going to circle back to that in a little while, but I want you to keep that kind of fresh in the back of your mind for a little bit. Just keep it fresh for later. We are also going to be dispelling folk fear versus fact. This is not to throw away caution. We're not just throwing caution away into the wind, never to be seen again, but it is to understand where caution is valid and when you just need to learn to respect the plants and the herbal allies that we have. So another thing that we will be discussing is the doctrine of signatures and the historically heavy emphasis on this and why so many modern herbalists have moved away from the doctrine of signatures. This is something else that Paracelsus created, is this doctrine of signatures. And although it is accurate at times, it should never ever be your primary basis for any herbal considerations. Ever. Don't do it. And that is actually where we are going to begin with today's lesson, with the doctrine of signatures. So, Paracelsus thought that his creator left these signatures and signs in the world for people to find and do this creator's holy work and bidding to help each other. So what it was is that he, Paracelsus, would see things, plants, and the walnut. It looks similar to the brain, so this plant must help with disorders of the brain. And sometimes, like the walnut, these correlations were actually somewhat correct. Walnuts, which are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin E, and antioxidant compounds, do actually support some neural health issues. However, the resemblance to the brain has no causally predictable relationship with these nutrients. So, verdict, yeah, that one's fine. It works. Okay, cool, great. But then, take liverwort. This was another plant that actually received its name because the doctrine of signatures gave it to it. The claim here was that the plant resembles human liver lobes. Therefore, it has to be a great ally for treating ailments of the liver. Modern phytochemical analysis show no hepatoprotectiveness at all from this plant. 0. It actually contains tannins, which are mild irritants to the liver. So, quite the opposite of a beneficial plant for the liver. So the symbolic claims have 0 proof. Historically, this is a complete misattribution. Moving forward from that time period, people did try to turn the doctrine of signatures more into a mnemonic way of learning. That is a symbolic way of remembering with metaphors and imagery. when appropriate. There are no scientific basis in any of the doctrine of signatures. 0. Paracelsus further refined the doctrine of signatures himself as he learned and experimented, and we see that it wasn't a way of magical thinking, even in this time. It wasn't about chemical validity either, though. It was more so based on attention to detail and pattern, which is why I bring it up. Because in herbalism, the most important thing that you can ever do is learn to recognize and pay attention to details and patterns on a personal level with each individual person you are trying to help. So, they moved into observing the plants first more closely and then thinking, oh, if this plant is doing these great things in this particular way for this particular body part, and it looks like that same particular body part, then this is what must have been intentional in design. So, this is how we are going to remember this herb from now on. So, pattern recognition was second. And that is how we moved forward with the doctrine of signatures, where in today's modern approach to herbalism is moving that pattern recognition to the beginning and then assigning correlations. So, again, now it is mnemonic in meaning. It is more for memory's sake, not a scientific method. So let's reflect. When you look at a new plant, I want to ask you, what is the first thing that it makes you feel? This is important when you are diving into herbalism. You need to recognize how you feel in the company of plants. Does this plant make you curious? Does it make you cautious? Or maybe you feel comforted? This is always something to think about when you are experiencing a new plant, and take note of that. That intuition is very important and will serve you well in the future. Moving forward from there, we are going to dive into folk fear versus clinical caution. In herbalism, a healthy level of respect and caution, where due, are valid, but only when based on fact, not inherited fear. So, take lobelia. This is one I feel extremely passionately about. It is a perfect example of folk fear versus fact. Lobelia has a nasty reputation for causing nausea, for causing vomiting, for causing elevated heart rate, for causing seizures and comas, and all of these horrible things. No matter how you use it, it's unsafe, it's unpredictable, don't trust it. And why is this? This is because there was a foraging group led sometime in the 1900s, I don't remember which year precisely, and I haven't been able to recover the source material, but anyway, the people leading this group were very ill-informed. They harvested the lobelia in its late stage of maturity, when it was in bloom, when some of the plants had mature seeds, and as a beginner, you never want to do that with lobelia. That is when the component of lobeline is at its highest, most concentrated form. Any responsible herbalist never harvested it at that point in its life cycle, to then give to curious explorers to smoke without restraint under the guise of you'll have pain relief and your nervous system will calm down. Because no, it's not the right time. It's not going to work. We would know that with a late stage harvesting, we move into an entirely different therapeutic purpose with this plant, where we need to use much smaller doses, because at this point it is intentionally used as an emetic to purge someone's stomach through vomiting. The group that harvested these plants with this instructor all got sick. They were all vomiting, and some were pretty bad off with racing heart rate and needed to be admitted to the emergency room. It was as if they had been given far too much nicotine, and that they were not used to it. Because yes, lobeline does have a very similar chemical response as nicotine. The foragers leading this class did not want to admit that they screwed up that badly, though. So, like any irresponsible person, they spread a folk fear, one which highlighted lobelia as a dangerous and non-friendly plant. It's too unpredictable. Rather than taking this opportunity to better educate themselves and others and take accountability for what happens when you harvest plants and provide them to others without a proper understanding of the plant itself or the person you are giving it to. Their harmful rhetoric still affects the herbal community today. Lobelia is dangerous. Lobelia has to be used in small doses. Lobelia can make all of these horrible things happen to you. You must fear lobelia. Lobelia is too unpredictable. Don't fear lobelia. Just harvest it responsibly when it's mature but still young, not blooming, not making seed, not a sprout, just in that nice little happy window, which typically lasts a few months. And then you're perfectly fine. The lobelia will do what you're wanting it to do. And this is an example of when folk narratives overload logic and scientific proof, where clinical observations and responsibility are ignored in the way of people who spread fear and irresponsibility instead of taking accountability. When we come across fearful rhetoric like this, based around a plant friend, it is always important to embrace an analytical approach. Ask, where did this warning come from? What happened in context to create this warning? What mishap could have happened to cause this confusion? And then look at it from a state of reframe. Respect asks you for understanding. Fear asks you for avoidance. So, let's take a breath, because that was a little bit heavy, and what we'll go into next is still a little bit heavy still. So let's take a quick breath. Pause this video if you need to. Get yourself something to snack on or to drink, and then unpause and let's continue. Moving forward, there are 3 safety tiers that I personally observe with herbs. The first is food, the second is potent, and the third is restricted. An example of a food herb would be mint. Everyone loves mint. You can have it in drinks, you can have it in food, you can enjoy it as much as you want any day, every day, and it's really not going to cause any significant issues if you were to overdo it. A potent herb, however, would be yarrow. It has a sharp flavor. It is therapeutically very potent. You use it in only small amounts and for a very controlled amount of time. And it has contraindications. So you need to be careful that with yarrow in particular, that you aren't giving it to someone with an allergy to any plants in the Asteraceae family. Sorry, I always say that one difficultly. Or to anyone who is pregnant, though, because it can cause uterine contractions. It can cause an increased allergic reaction in people who are allergic to other plants in the Asteraceae family. You don't want to recommend it to anyone with a bleeding disorder or who takes blood thinners or who will have surgery in the next 2 weeks, because it is a mild anticoagulant. An example of a restricted herb would be belladonna. I love belladonna, but this is one to study, not to ingest. The difference between a therapeutic dose and a deadly dose is within mere micrograms for this herb, which is far smaller than what can be safely measured outside of a professional laboratory. So, for an herb to be considered part of the food tier, it is required to meet certain criteria of the following. It must be safe in an everyday culinary and nutritional use without causing bodily harm in ways of toxicity or pharmacological interference in healthy adults. The regulatory status used to describe most food-grade herbs is GRAS, G-R-A-S, which is just a silly way of saying generally recognized as safe. A potent herb would be the one who contains compounds that have a measurable effect in a small or moderately controlled dose. They offer strong therapeutic effects, but require adequate knowledge of how to complete their preparations, dosaging, and of their contraindications. A contraindication is something that can be going on inside this person, whether that be a lifestyle effect, or a food that they eat regularly, or a medication that they take, or an underlying health issue, or pre-existing chronic health condition that this herb can exacerbate or negatively react with. And then we have our restricted herbs. These are those whose therapeutic and toxic doses differ by mere milligrams, or even less, micrograms. They can be extremely dangerous to handle without precise measurement that can only be performed with professional lab equipment. In the words of Rosemary Gladstar, herbs are not dangerous. Ignorance is. So next week, we'll be translating some of the herbs from each of these categories into energetics. That is, how the body feels and what that looks like in chemistry. For now, I want you to think of some of the herbs that you have avoided out of fear rather than fact. Choose one, and over the next few days, find time to trace it back to its origins. Try to discover where this fear truly came from. Take note of that and submit that as an assignment. I want to know what you find. Your other assignment is to think of 5 herbs that you use in your kitchen or your daily life and just observe them. When you taste and smell them on their own, how do they taste? How do they smell? What sensations do they make you feel in your body when you ingest them or touch them to your skin? What are they provoking? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it drying? Is it moistening? Is it soothing or invigorating? Do they make your mouth feel tight or dry? These are all very important things to note and will help you in the future to know how to classify herbs by their energetics. And that is all for this week. I thank you for being here, and I look forward to hearing what you discover in your assignments and seeing you again next week in our following lesson. Have a great week. Enjoy.